everyone, and welcome to this next group of oral presentations. And I welcome Professor Christine McCourt from the UK and Dr. Nuzhat Aziz from Hyderabad, India, and Dr. Mala Arora, who are the judges in this session. So we'll start right away with the first author. We're going to have NLBC 027, Becky Westbury, who is going to be, who has presented her paper on an exploration of midwives' attitudes towards caring for women who choose to birth outside of guidelines. So over to you, Christine and Nuzhat.
Thank you, Becky. Can you hear me? Thank you, Becky. It was very interesting to know, read about women birthing outside the guidelines. And a variety of institutes have different attitudes to it. You have mentioned length of qualification was one of the factors influencing it. So can you elaborate a little bit more on it? Length of
Yeah, so one of the questions in the survey was how long had midwives been qualified. I felt it would be really good to capture just a picture as how long midwives had been practicing, and whether that influenced actually how they felt in terms of caring for women birthing outside of guidelines. And we did find that the longer midwives had been qualified, the more comfortable generally they felt caring for women who chose to birth outside of guidelines.
Thanks. There was another point that you had. What do you think that would be all the positive influences that if we have to promote in an institute to make sure that we have a better kind of a response to people who are asking outside the guidelines? I mean, if you can just summarize all your positive influences from this study.
Yeah, sure. So I think a lot of the midwives who responded felt that having leaders who supported them in practice, that really helped them to feel comfortable caring for women birthing outside of guidelines. Also then having peer support from other midwives. So having a culture whereby supporting women birthing outside of guidelines is something that, that is well supported and that the majority of midwives feel comfortable with. I think that's a really positive factor. Also providing training and guidelines, training and guidance. A lot of the midwives who responded to the survey felt that they would like more training in that area. So having an opportunity for midwives to develop their knowledge and skill set in caring for women birthing outside of guidelines.
I loved your study. Christian, would you like to ask anything?
Okay, thank you. Yes, I found it very interesting to listen to and to read. And I wanted to ask just a couple of questions. First of all, what do you think were the benefits of having both quantitative and qualitative analysis within the survey?
So I felt like it would be really beneficial to capture the real experiences and the voices of the midwives in the free text responses, which is why I opted to do qualitative research. I wasn't expecting midwives to be quite so generous with their time, and it was fantastic that midwives provided some really detailed free text responsive, which then was really rich qualitative data to analyse. I think equally having the quantitative data enabled us to look at trends and patterns in different places of work, different roles. So I just think they both types of research complemented each other for this particular study.
Mm-hmm. Okay, and can you just tell us a little bit about how you tackled the qualitative component, because you had a lot of responses there, so how did you handle it?
Yeah, so initially I used NVivo to code the data and look at themes, and then Alice Einion, who's supported me to present the research, she did a second researcher analysis and just went through those themes. And so the themes that we've given are the final ones that the two of us have both, second checked.
Mm-hmm. Okay, and one quite important theme seemed to be around fears of judgment, fears of what might happen in this situation. And I wondered what kind of areas of theory you have considered to help to understand the nature of the problem more fully, because clearly it's not simply a matter of training and experience, it's more complex than this.
Yeah, sure. So I think a lot of respondents did make reference to a fear of judgment, a fear of litigation, a fear of implications. There's obviously a lot of work that could possibly come out of this in terms of looking at cultures and looking at different levels of support that are available within midwifery. I think we've only just obviously scraped the surface of what what we could do in the future. But I think it's just a case of we are still in the process of writing up the full findings. So we will, of course, be doing more, more referencing and more reading as part of that. But, initially, I think it's just going to be really looking at support and also then perhaps addressing the underlying cultural issues in terms of, the support that midwives feel that they have and how we as professionals speak about and feel about women birthing outside of guidelines as well.
Okay, thank you. I think we're probably just about running out of time, aren't we?
Yeah, but it was very interesting, Becky, and I'm sure you will stimulate many other people to look at aspects like that and review their work or review their responses as to how they improve. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thanks.
Thank you, Becky. And we'll move on to the next author. That is NLBC 010, Marina Weekend. Marina's paper is on physiological plateaus during normal labor and birth, a concept overview.
Christine, would you like to take the first question?
Okay, yes. Hello, Marina, and I enjoyed your presentation. It was very interesting, and also enjoyed the background, how you came to this question and how the thinking developed. So that was great as well. I'd just like to kind of explore a little bit what you think the potential implications are of the research. In your presentation, you looked at the concepts and you also drew in some wider evidence about physiology of labour and time in labour, which was obviously, as somebody who's written about this, it was fascinating for me. What do you think are the next steps in terms of enhancing the knowledge to underpin practice from this study?
Yeah, thank you. Well, thank you first for having me. I think we are at the very beginning of this field of research where I find currently the biggest challenge is really finding evidence. So when people are interested in this topic area, it is so excruciatingly difficult to locate something through database search that I think one of the first steps we have really is to generate evidence, collect evidence, produce evidence in formats that are sort of acceptable to the medical society, which are in a format that is sort of peer reviewed, and may that be qualitative, quantitative research, but kind of research that we can say, okay, this is not just an anecdote, this is actual research, and we can sort of prove that this phenomenon or these various phenomena exist. So I think this is basically one of the first steps we need to take, is to grab our attention and direct it towards this topic to generate more interest in this area and maybe show really, well, this is an area where we have to look at and generate research about.
Okay, so I mean, this is something that you've just done with your study, and also we've got the interesting work from the WHO recently. So there is a coming together of stimulation to look at the topic. So if you could choose what research project you would do next to build on your work, what would you try to do? What would it be?
Yeah, well, that's a good question because I'm actually doing my PhD at the moment. So I'm pursuing this topic. I'm doing that. I'm currently doing a grounded theory study on this topic where we are interviewing midwives who work in out-of-hospital settings in a first step, and then later midwives who are working in hospitals and other settings, and ask them about their experiences just to collect what is really happening in practice, and especially what is happening in that kind of practice, so we don't have so many regulations that are really narrowing down what we're kind of allowed to do. So this is why we're looking at out of hospital settings first. So this is keeping me busy for the next 2 years, and then there's a couple more ideas for keeping busy for the next 5 or 10 years, because I really think that's a large area where we might want to look into.
Okay, I think I've taken up my time, haven't I?
No, but it was interesting because we have come to a point where for a long, long time, labor was carved in stone and it has to go on this line. And then there has been a time, and it's a good time now to contest every aspect of labor that was like written, and it has to go at so many centimeters. So a lot of scope for research in labor, I suppose so today. And yours was one stimulating one that was there. If I have to ask Marina, at what dilatation? I mean, you have done a lot of analysis and collection of data. What dilatation, cervical dilatation, was this phenomenon more common? Was it throughout labor, or it was like the later part of labor or early labor?
Well, some of these phenomena are really collecting around different areas. Like one is very prominent around the time of full dilation. There we see a lot of phenomena collect at that time, like rest and be thankful phase, or lull during transition, all these kinds of things. But really, when I look at the whole collection of things I found, they are spreading across the whole labor, and even some studies describe them before labor or after the child is born, that there's still some kind of stalls happening. So I would say it's really happening throughout the whole time. And this is really what is fascinating me most about the whole thing, that it seems to be on and off, and that this is normal and this is happening and being described in literature. But yeah, if I have to say where it's more collective in one place, that would be definitely around the time of full cervical dilation, I'd say.
I love Christine's suggestion as to what is next, how you're going to build it up on this. And I think that would be an interesting suggestion for you as well. So thank you so much for your time and submitting this research to our conference. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Marina. And now we move on to NLBC 048, Lisa Kane-Low, who's presented her data on the non-clinical drivers of the overuse of continuous CTG, evidence from the workflow.
Sorry, can you give me the number again? I just need to...
It is 048.
048, okay, thank you.
Lisa, you could put your video on now, please.
It says that I am not allowed to. The host stopped my video.
Okay. So,
Lisa, I found it very interesting because I thought you really collected very interesting and very true drivers of non-clinical use. We have always spoken about clinical criteria, but I thought this does exist and nobody quantifies it. Nobody wants to talk about it. And I really enjoyed your, you have really given a lot of thought. But I thought one of the suggestions that I had, and maybe a question, would be, how do we get the inferences very well? I agree with your concepts and with your end product, but I wish a lot of my colleagues would be looking for, show it, prove it. That's the way. But you have done the first job. So do you think we can really sit down and prove that it exists? And I will show you how.
I think part of what we're looking at for some next steps is we're bringing together representatives from the different professional organizations and also leaders in the field. And we're going to be holding what we call deliberative panels, where we'll be talking about our findings and then working with them to look at how can we move past these barriers in order to really change. And we've gotten some initial thinking, even just some simple strategies like the order sets that are often automatic in many institutions, having them default to intermittent auscultation instead of continuous electronic fetal monitoring as one way to create a provider stop where they deliberately have to change the order is one example. Just really asking for more thoughtful approaches instead of automatic routine, always using continuous CTG.
Christine, would you like to ask the next question?
Yes, sure. Lisa, thank you. A very interesting presentation and a familiar problem. Of course, we've seen this with a range of interventions, particularly more technological interventions that are not used in accordance with evidence, but overused. And so I'm wondering, what are the next steps? One of the things that struck me was that a lot of the understanding obtained in the study was very much internal to the organization. Do you think there are any wider or external factors that also need to be addressed?
I think that there's certainly an opportunity to look at our educational pathways, particularly the obstetrical residency programs. When we were looking at the unit patterns, we saw that nursing team members really worked together and had formalized education around training for use of monitoring. And now they're adding in intermittent auscultation since our time on the unit. But the residents didn't have that kind of experience. And so we were really looking at more interprofessional collaboration, learning together so that there's confidence in the skills that are being used when they're doing intermittent auscultation, and greater familiarity on the part of the medical providers as one key strategy.
Okay, yeah, that was an interesting thing that I noticed about your presentation, which perhaps challenges people's assumptions about medicine and nursing or midwifery, that in a sense the formal education level was higher. Do you think that's, do you relate that to any other kind of more structural factors to do with the hierarchy or the status of medicine or nursing or midwifery?
Yeah, I do think that the hierarchy is definitely in play. And what we saw was what we referred to in a number of scenarios where it was like a deference to the other provider group and not using your knowledge to argue for what might be evidence-based, but instead to have deference to the physician and assume that if they said, continuous CTG, that would be the default choice. And it's interesting to me that it's assumed that nurses need formal training, but that somehow having a medical degree, you didn't need formal training, you would know, was sort of the approach to it. And I think that's a consistent challenge we have, where people who have expertise like nursing in the type of care that they would provide, or midwives in the care of normal, they get questioned for their expertise, but this assumption of medical dominance and knowledge for something that's normal and healthy, they still get priority put on their degree as opposed to really demonstrating that knowledge. And we saw that tension between the different provider groups in our observations.
Nizat, was there anything else you wanted to ask? We've just got a very short time left.
No, it was nice. I only thought that, if you have to change things back into your institution, you will have to really show people that they exist. Otherwise, it would be like, you are biased towards it and you're not. And then I thought this was the preliminary part of your study and it needs to be built up to a second step where we need to move forward. But very interesting. Thank you for submitting it. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Lisa. We'll move on to the next author, NLBC 058, Rita Pulpito. Rita, please put on your mic and your video.
And the title is Giving Birth and Freedom, Italian Experience, I suppose.
Alternative positions in birth and the expulsive period. Giving birth and freedom, alternate. Yeah, Rita.
Hello. Good morning.
Morning, Rita. Thank you for your presentation. I've really enjoyed watching all of them. I'm Christine McCourt from London. Just wanted to start off by asking a few details about your study. What was the main aim of your study? Were you really wanting to look at outcomes of different birth positions, or was it more a focus on examining what influences the use of different positions in labor and birth?
Okay. Good morning. I'm a midwife and I'm one of the team of the study. So we divided into two groups. Group A, where women were free to decide which position they want to have during labor and expulsive period. And there was another group we called Group B, where women haven't the freedom to decide which position to have during their labor and expulsive period, and were obliged to have a dichotomic position. This, after we submitted to these women a questionnaire where they asked their experience about labor and expulsive period. And at the end, we know that Group A, where there was a freedom of movement, leads women to live their experience in a positive way. And while Group B, where they were obliged to the dichotomic position, they lived the experience of labor and expulsive period and generally of birth with passivity and physical and emotional suffering.
Okay, so it sounds as though your main focus was really on the women's experience of these different alternatives. Okay.
Yes.
Thank you.
Yeah. Can I ask a question, Rita? One of the things that was very surprising was the use of Christelar maneuver. And
yes,
I mean, we used to hear long ago, but over a period of time, you know, we don't hear this anymore. And I found it very interesting. And that too, 42% of women had Christelar maneuver.
Yes, I'm another part of the group. I'm Filomena. Yes, because in Italy is a lot of medicalization, and we have the use of Christelar maneuver. This is a problem for us, for our profession as a midwife, because we haven't the possibility to stop doctors and medical interventions in any way in the expulsive period.
Okay, thank you. How do you think your study can be used now? What do you plan to do next, having done this small study?
Okay. Yeah. Okay. I have. Okay. We starting from our study, we wanted that some Italian gynecologists can learn about it, because women perception is very important for a positive birth, and our role, such as midwife, is very important and central for give everyone this opportunity. So physical and emotional suffering is an important aspect for women and us like professionals. So we can start to change in our, such as we are possible the medicalization that in Italy is very present, and many women during their pregnancies decided to follow a gynecologist instead midwife. Is a cultural situation different from other countries in the world, where our professionality is low, such as instead medical one.
I suppose it would also enable awareness that to come in. So
yeah.
The kind of differences that you have shown. So thank you so much, Rita, and we really enjoyed listening to your presentation. Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. And
Thank you.
the next paper is NLBC 075, Madhavi Kesupaka, and her paper is on effectiveness of suckling on third stage of labor at a modern government maternity hospital, Hyderabad, Telangana.
Hi, Madhavi.
Hi, ma'am. Good evening.
Very nicely presented, and it was interesting that you showed suckling and a tremendous amount of difference between one group and another group. Just a small question that I had as I was listening to your presentation is you have written the amount of blood loss changed from 252 to 148 ml. Is it written? Because I wasn't able to understand it very well. And it's written duration of labor, the third stage of labor changed from 17 minutes to 12 minutes. Am I correct?
Oh, no, ma'am. I have given a ranges that is 100 to 150.
Okay.
200 to 250. And also in the duration also 5 minutes and less than 5 minutes, 5 minutes, 10 minutes and 15 minutes, about 20 minutes I have given. Whereas in the control group, there are more, about 20 minutes is more. In the experimental group, 10 to 15 minutes is very, 10 to 15 minutes are more in experimental group.
Christine, would you like to ask anything?
Hi, yes, thank you for your presentation. It was very interesting. I don't know the context so well, so I have a little question about the control group because I'm not familiar with the usual practice. So in your control group, were the women not having the babies with skin-to-skin contact and told that they couldn't feed their babies? And is this the usual practice in the labor wards?
So no, ma'am. In experimental and control group also, in inclusion criteria, only single turn live baby I have included, ma'am.
What is the routine kind of care that you give after the baby is born?
Routine care I have given the immediately after the delivery of the baby. In my study, I have given the checking of Apgar score and the rubbing and warming the baby, and immediately after the umbilical cord, stopping the pulsation after the cutting of the umbilical cord, and immediately I have put the baby on the mother's breast for suckling.
Okay, so yes, I'm just trying to understand the difference between the two groups, you see. So because it sounds as though normally the baby is suckling anyway. So I'm just struggling with understanding the difference in practice here. So did you delay the suckling of the baby for the control group? What was the difference between the two groups?
Can you repeat the question, ma'am? I didn't understand.
I'm trying to be clear about the difference between the experimental group and the control group. So in the control group, did you delay the mother suckling the baby?
No, madam. I didn't delay, but in the control group, after the third stage labor, we have given the breastfeeding, not during the third stage labor.
Okay, now I understand. Thank you. Okay.
Thank you.
It is before the placental delivery on this side and after the placenta came out on the other side.
Okay.
It was not little clear over there. How do you propose to move this to practice in your place, Madhavi? I mean, you have shown tremendous amount of difference. So how are you going to move this to your clinical practice?
Yeah, if I am there in the during the delivery, now also when I'm in clinicals, now also I'm practicing this only, ma'am. Immediately after the delivery, I use it to suckle the baby to reduce the blood loss and duration.
Okay. And what would you do next as a researcher? What do you think is the next step in terms of advancing the research on the subject?
it should be come into practice for every hospital, madam, whether it is in government or in a private. It should be come to the practice during the third step. Initially, they are giving breastfeeding, but after the delivery of the placenta, they are giving. It should be better if you give the suckling during the third stage labor to reduce this blood loss and duration. It simultaneously reduce the primary PPH, ma'am.
And do you think the hospitals will respond, or do you think they will want to see a larger study?
They'll respond, madam. If we educated them, if we create an awareness to the sisters and in the staff, they'll follow.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, ma'am.
Thank you, Madhavi.
Thank you so much.
For this next speaker, Mala and Christine will score. So the next is NLBC 133, Kalavati, on the impact of breech clinics on the incidence of cesarean section.
Hi, Christine. I'm Mala.
Hi there. Hi. Okay. Hello, Kalavati.
Hi, Mom.
Yeah.
Hi, thank you for your presentation.
Thank you.
It was very interesting. And it sounds as though this is something quite new for your setting. I think in Britain, it's the same for us. And I know Sean well because I was her PhD supervisor. Yeah, can you say a little bit more? This was quite a small study, and I was very impressed with the study design and the conduct of the study. What do you think should be done next in terms of research to follow this up?
Thank you, Mom. Actually, this study is we need actually all maternity units in India needs a dedicated breech clinic. And the second one, evidence-based respectful care for the breech women, choice of vaginal breech for this study purpose.
Mm-hmm. Do you think this is going to be easy to implement, or what kind of work will be needed to implement it more widely?
This is a challenge for us, actually, Ma'am. This is a very good research for me and to study for this, and this is a good challenge. And we have shown our study, and most of the India we don't have the breech clinic, and they won't respect the mother's choice because of Indian culture and all. So the first institute of Fernandez Hospital has started a dedicated breech clinic with a dedicated team. And I have put my slides in that how many mothers have come to with a breech presentation in the clinic, and how many have turned to breech to cephalic, and how many we have offered for the breech mothers. And the success rate we have seen, out of 5 they have agreed for the vaginal breech birth. We had like 3 success physiological breech births. Mm-hmm. And with that, we have seen a reduction in the C-section rate for the breech presentation, 11.5%.
Mm-hmm. Okay. I thought it was a lovely study. It's quite small. What would you do next if you're going to do more research to strengthen your argument?
And we need to reset term breech trial, and this may help in reduce a cesarean section for the breech presentation.
Okay, so you would do a trial?
Yes.
Okay.
Someone has to start reversing the harm done by the term breech trial, and you've made a good beginning. My question to you was, do you do any kind of fetal weight estimation or check whether it's a footling breech before you take up patients for vaginal breech births, or that is not in your protocol?
Yes, we do a scan at 37 weeks, and fetal position and head position. It should not be overextended head for the breech delivery.
Stargazing, right? And when you talk about spinning babies, what is the time duration, or how long do you do it? And is it done in your antenatal clinic or in a separate, at a separate appointment?
And as well as a separate clinic was there, and we also encourage the mothers in the breech clinic to do the spinning babies actually. And we found women with a breech presentation around 32 weeks were referred to the spinning babies, and we'll encourage them to do the spinning babies.
So what is the time duration for which you spin them?
And we can, within 1 to 2 weeks, we'll encourage the mothers to do this one, and we can see the big change, and we'll ask the mothers any fetal big movements while you are doing a spinning babies, and they can tell like a butterfly position, butterfly movement in the lower abdomen, or a side or left lateral or right lateral. Or so when they come into the clinic, we'll do the abdominal palpation also, we'll find the breech fetal position. Then 1 to 3 days, we can make a big change that we can ask the women.
So my question, I'm sorry, I can't make myself clear. How long do you make them do the spinning procedure? Is it like a time duration of 10, 15 minutes, or you do it every day, or just tell us a little more about?
Yeah, we'll tell every day to do them like per day, like twice or thrice to do the, we have mentioned 3 spinning babies exercises. Okay. Forward lean inversion and side lying release and abdominal shifting. These 3 exercises we'll encourage them to do the every day.
Okay, for 3 days.
Yeah. For when they come into the breech clinic from 32 weeks to, we'll encourage them to do the up to 2 weeks.
Oh, up to 2 weeks. Okay. So yes, as Dr. Christine also mentioned, my own feeling was that we are still very small numbers. You said you had 68 mothers referred, of which yes, 33 underwent external cephalic version.
Yes.
And I think the answer that I would, I mean, the way you can take this forward is if you make this a multi-centric trial, if you tie up with other breech clinics, that's the only way you will yes, get the numbers that will be needed to convince the public or the obstetricians and midwives that yes, this is a fruitful exercise. Yes. So you do have a long road ahead, and I'm sure you will go forward and popularize this.
Thank you, Ma'am.
Thank you, Kalavati, and thank you, Mala. Christine and Nuzhat, if you're okay to continue, we are running a little late, so we'll just continue to session 4 without that break. Yeah, all right. So the next author is Marie-Thérèse from NLBC 057. Her paper is on systematic review and meta-synthesis of barriers and facilitators to the implementation of midwife-led care for childbearing women in low and middle income countries. Sangi, yeah.
Yeah, good morning.
Hi there, hi. I enjoyed listening to this, and I certainly would like to have a copy of the publication so that I can share it with students and our research team, because it's very relevant to our research as well. So I was very pleased to see the work being done. Yeah. And is this is part of a doctoral study?
Yes, it is.
Is this the first stage in a doctoral study? So can you tell us a little bit more about the next stage in your doctoral work?
Yeah, we wanted to do an ethnography, especially in India, because India has launched midwife-led care last October 2018. So we planned for an ethnography wherein we wanted to see the part, like how far the midwives have been provided with the facilities, as well as also to have an interview with the midwives, like to know which factors facilitated them, as well as which factors is acting as a barrier to implement the program. And the third thing was we wanted also to have a focus group on women so that we understand how far they are getting satisfied with this midwife-led care. So these three are very important, we felt, because many countries did not have the sustainability of the program. So I think as India is launching this program, finding out these three factors will help to sustain the program as well.
Mm-hmm. Okay, maybe you could just tell us a little bit more about the ways in which you're using your systematic review findings to inform the next steps in the work. How are you using the themes from your systematic review to investigate the subject further?
Yeah, the first thing is the policymakers, because we could see from the systematic review, low middle income countries, resources acting as a main problem. And the second thing is the clinical protocol, because many have started the program and many midwives did not know like what should be practiced in the setting, which is their scope of work. So I think this systematic review should give way to the policymakers to have a clear clinical protocol so that it's been given to the midwife when she is implementing the program. That is very much important than even the resource, I should say, because they get into the field and many have said, many midwives reporting saying that they didn't know whether this procedure can be done or it is the part of the obstetrician's duty. So the clarification is required most. So that would this systematic review would bring into.
And I had just one more question about the review, because you didn't say very much about the quality of the research that you found. And having worked in this area, I'm conscious of the fact there's a lot of gaps. And it struck me that there was quite a lot of focus on resources, but I wonder whether the people commenting have a sufficiently broad knowledge of the cost effectiveness of different models of care. How do you deal with the limitations of the research when you use a systematic review like this?
You mean the limitation of the study?
Because you've drawn themes from your review, but of course the studies that were available have limitations as well. And for example, the resources theme was clearly very strong in the review, but I'm aware of the fact that many practitioners don't know the economics of these different models of care. So I was just wondering how you tackle the limitations of the existing research when you use a systematic review like this.
Yeah, the main concept is that it has to be implemented based on the context as well as based on each country's. Like, for example, there was difference in the, like if it is going to be a more religion-based economic country, then the care setting is different. So I think which is prevalent or which is more required for India is what has to be taken up. Like, for example, accessibility of care. Accessibility in the sense when you organize a midwife-led unit, you see that it's within a 5-kilometer range for the public. So it should be in the reachable by the community people. So based on the context where it is getting implemented, this systematic review has to be seen into is what I think.
Mm-hmm.
I think I answered your question.
No, Sangi, it was, I think for all of us in low-income countries, medium-income countries, it will be very useful because when we are writing down the policies and protocols, so this review would be really helpful for us, and I hope it will be published soon and hope we'll be able to get a copy of it because we'll be searching for it and we don't have time and the resources to do it. And so we like ready-made food and ready-made. Sure. So I was very happy to see this part of this. So thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
And we move to the next one, NLBC 077, Sunita Panda, pre-labor and labor interventions and mode of birth, findings from a multi-center cohort study.
Hi, Dr. Okay, I love to see the comparisons in both the groups and they were very interesting. Just had a doubt, did you have any exclusion criteria?
So basically, this is part of a large study. This is one of the key findings from a bigger study, which looks into other aspects of other factors for planned and unplanned cesarean section. So the women who were part of this study, the inclusion criteria were any woman who could read or understand English, because all the surveys were in English, and women who were 18 years of age or over, and first-time mothers, because this study solely focused on first-time mothers.
Okay. Now, because the most important variables would be multifetal pregnancy, and they have a very different kind. And suddenly, if you anytime put it into a different group, whether the number is small, but it just spoils your complete data on the other side, or whether it's chronic hypertension or pregestational diabetes. So that was a doubt that I had.
So yes, I mean, we controlled for all those confounding factors, and the findings that I have presented in my presentation, they include all the multivariable analysis using Poisson regression analysis. So we controlled for each of those factors. So I ran univariate analysis first, and any factors that were significantly associated with cesarean section from univariate analysis, I included those in the model to do the multivariable analysis. So I have control for those. But of course, it's limited to a lot of things, as you just rightly said, hypertension. I've just said whether they had high blood pressure or not, but it could be gestational hypertension, or it could be essential hypertension, similarly for diabetes. And I have data for those, but I haven't, these findings are limited to just
during the...
Christine, would you like to ask the next question?
Okay, sorry, I was startled there by another noise. Yes, okay, that was helpful to hear, because I wasn't quite sure about the level of controls that you'd used in the regression analysis. So the analyses that we were looking at had controlled for the two, I think it was 2 factors, wasn't it?
The analysis, the multivariate analysis that's presented in this presentation, it has controlled all the confounding factors from pre-pregnancy, pregnancy, and intrapartum.
Okay. Okay, thank you very much. So my next question really is whether, yes, what do you think the implications of the findings are?
Well, first of all, this is, yes, Christine, sorry, I interrupted your question.
No problem. What do you think, what are the findings telling us, and what should the implications be of the study?
This is very interesting, because over the last 2 days, we have been hearing a lot about respectful maternity care and women's involvement in decision to birth, and all the interventions that we do. Regardless whether women actually are aware of those interventions and their complications associated with those. So one of the most common clinical interventions in the intrapartum period would be induction of labor, use of oxytocin, either to induce or augment labor, or use of epidural as pain relief. We were talking about all these 3 interventions over the last 2 days, quite a lot. So I wanted to focus in this presentation those issues around the cascade of these 3 interventions. I wanted to look around what happens. So I created 8 scenarios for women who had induction of labor, with or without epidural, with or without oxytocin. And I wanted to see what happens to their mode of birth when they were either induced, received epidural, or received oxytocin, or did not have any, and those. So these findings will actually help us to reflect back on our clinical practice to see what can be done and what is the justification behind these interventions. Can we rightly justify the decision to either induce a woman's labor, or to for epidural, or commencing oxytocin for augmentation or induction of labor? So it's really rightly, because it is so grounded in our practice. So it was essential to give evidence around it, especially for first-time mothers.
It looks as though the rates routinely in Ireland are very high of all these interventions. So this is going to enhance the awareness, hopefully, of professionals and the women. I just had one more specific question about the choices in the study, because you put together the induction and non-induction without oxytocin. I just wondered what informed your decision about that?
Fantastic question, Christine, and that's quite interesting. I would love to explain that I actually divided the clinical scenarios into 8 categories. So the first category was women who did not have induction, did not have epidural, did not have oxytocin. And then from second category to up to 6th category were women who had induction of labor. Well, the first 6 categories of the 8 categories included women who had induction of labor, no epidural, no oxytocin, or with oxytocin, and women who had no induction of labor, no epidural, no. The reason was all these 6 categories, they were not significantly associated with cesarean section when I did the univariate analysis.
Perhaps if you have an induction but you don't need the oxytocin, you're really somebody who would have labored okay without the induction, perhaps.
Yes, again, Christine, more than the oxytocin, the use of epidural with induction of labor was significantly associated with, like, for example, in the first 6 categories, women who were induced or who were not induced or were induced without epidural, without oxytocin, there were 1 in 5 women of those category who had a cesarean section. Whereas for about 1 in 2 women who were induced with epidural had a cesarean section, and 1 in 3 women who were induced with epidural, with oxytocin had a cesarean section, which actually indicates that it's the combination of epidural and induction with or without oxytocin that increased the rate of cesarean section. And it's so obvious from the cascade of intervention.
We'll have to interrupt you here, Sunita. Thank you.
No worries. Thanks very much.
We'll move on to the next paper, NLBC 104, Lisa Corrigan, on the effectiveness and characteristics of pregnancy yoga interventions, a systematic review and meta-analysis.
Hi, how are you? Greetings from Dublin, Ireland.
Lisa, it was a wonderful study, and I think I would be waiting for it to come published, and then look forward to distributing it, because yoga we all Indians feel very proud about it, and the amount of difference that you showed in the study was phenomenal. I mean, it was very interesting. So would 30 minutes not be enough, and would 60 minutes only be enough?
It's a really good question, and that's what I really wanted to look at, because when I started looking at the literature, I started realizing the huge phenomenal variation of what was being offered. So actually, it was really tricky to try and compare randomized controlled trials based on what was being provided. So applying the FIT principle of exercise prescription, just to me, because I have a postgrad in clinical exercise, made absolute sense to try and break it down, because the concept of this study was to support us in designing the so-called ideal pregnancy yoga program to trial.
Yes.
But the evidence was certainly showing that 60 minutes plus had a greater effect. And I actually am a yoga teacher myself, and I would probably agree with that. But that's a bias.
I mean, we, the care providers, find 30 minutes very easy to convince people. 60 minutes, we would find it, we have to really sell it out.
Yeah, well, you know what, it's really interesting, because I suppose there's had to be, with COVID-19, there's had to be a shift online. So actually, we were about to start our trial. It was due to be face-to-face and had to shift online. And the nature of running it online has actually shortened the sessions, just because you don't have that social interaction you would have in a room, So there's been pros and cons.
Yes, true. Christine, would you like to ask?
Yeah, Lisa, can you just tell us a little bit more? This is a feasibility trial that you're running now, is it?
Yeah, that's a follow-up. So the systematic review and meta-analysis was stage 1 of a study that a bigger study, looking at the effectiveness of pregnancy yoga for stress, anxiety, and fear of birth. So the systematic review and meta-analysis was used to, I suppose, gather and synthesize all of the evidence from randomized controlled trials and quasi-experimental studies, and use that evidence alongside evidence from qualitative interviews with kind of all the key stakeholders, all the maternity care providers, pregnant women, postnatal women, yoga teachers, combine evidence from both to design a yoga program for a feasibility trial.
Okay.
Yeah. So this is kind of step one.
Okay, so you're doing the feasibility trial at the moment.
We are, yeah, we're into our third program. We were supposed to have one, and when we advertised it, we had phenomenal demand. Partially, I think, COVID-19, and women aren't, in Ireland anyway, they're not even accessing their standard kind of antenatal care classes. So it's been really challenging. So there was a huge uptake, a massive amount of interest in actually taking part in the study. So we had to go back to the drawing board and do an ethics amendment, and we now are into our third program.
And are you looking at this as a complex intervention? You're looking at different elements, stress, anxiety, and physiology of labour, which reminds me of, say, the trials on massage, which is similarly complex. I'm curious about, having worked on a massage trial and observed the effect on birth partners. Are you looking at birth partners at all in the research?
Wow, that's a really, really interesting question, actually. Unfortunately, we're not, because I suppose partially looking at the delivery outcomes was the original plan, but with having to shift the trial online and move to a feasibility trial as opposed to a randomized control trial, and that was going to take place within a maternity hospital, we lost that element of access to the medical charts. So yeah, with that, potentially there would have been that piece that you're talking about, and it may have been another interesting factor, I suppose. Yeah.
But maybe a full trial for the future after the feasibility trial.
Well, that's kind of the hope. We're kind of trying to build up, I suppose, as much evidence. I suppose in an ideal world, what I'd love to see would be that something like pregnancy yoga could be accessible to all women, because at the moment they talk about it being very cost effective. Well, cost effective for who? Because certainly classes in Ireland tend to be private classes, and they can be quite pricey. So that means they're not cost effective for everybody, and they're not easily accessible. And we see that in the women who access the classes. They generally tend to be, those middle class, higher income, well educated. So we're not getting to the women that we actually need to get to, who would really benefit from the program.
I suppose we'll have to take the elements and then design it for public sector. And in India, you would have to do it in a general clinic, waiting clinic, because you don't get people to come but they do wait for more than an hour. So you have to utilize that time to do it. But really enjoyed your focus, your research, and would be looking at your space over the
well, the paper is coming out hopefully soon. It's kind of finalized and good to go.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much. Thanks a lot.
Thank you, Lisa. And now we move to Caitlin, NLBC 179, Caitlin Wilson, consultant midwives in the United Kingdom, 20 years on. Has the role moved forward?
Christine, would you like to take this?
Hi there.
Hello there. Hi.
Hi.
It was good to see some research on consultant midwives, because there's been so little. I'm just a very quick practical question first. With your mapping study, the numbers of births and the population sizes are quite different between the different regions and different countries in the UK. So I was just wondering if you've looked at the numbers in relationship to number of births across these different areas.
we haven't specifically looked at the hospital birth populations, but we have looked at the number of consultant midwives, and we know that there are more than one consultant midwife in larger hospitals in the city centres, but that's something that we could look at in the future.
Okay. And you talked about the, you looked at the areas of clinical practice that were identified in your studies. I just wondered if you could just expand on those a little bit. Just tell us a little bit more about the meaning of those different areas.
Okay, so the meanings of the job titles really that the consultant midwives hold, because there's some that work in public health, there are some that work in normal birth.
Yeah, you've identified some areas of expert clinical practice.
Part of the role of the consultant midwife is over the last 20 years, it has kind of evolved and devolved, I suppose, in that there are areas of expertise. So some consultant midwives are now looking at areas of public health and normal birth, which have been the two kind of the main brackets that consultant midwives have worked in. And what really would entail those, the public health role would be around the Saving Babies' Lives bundles that we have, smoking cessation, obesity, mental health. A lot of those areas would be covered in the public health agenda. As for the normal birth, they would be looking at out-of-hospital birth, birth centres, and increasing normality within the hospital setting. And then what we're seeing more is consultant midwives getting into research. We're finding some who are working in intrapartum care, which is they have a very specific job role, which they're clinical experts in just intrapartum care, usually based on the labour wards here in the UK. So that's some of the divergence that we have seen in the role.
Okay.
There's something which you have mapped. I mean, I'm not from UK, so you'll have to pardon me for a different question. It was written that 40% of the time you spend in ECP, and that's how it was. Do you have any idea what was the kind of a division of roles or the work they did prior in all the three phases of your study?
So I'm sorry, so what are you asking what they did in their 40% clinical work, or what the consultant midwives did before coming into their consultant midwife role?
Sorry, I was not able to put myself to, in a proper way. Did this 40% change over time? Was it 10% before and now it has become expert clinical practice?
The general description around the consultant midwives is that they do offer the expert clinical practice. Lots of job descriptions, and the original goal for them was to be a 50-50 clinical role. But no, how that has been executed has been up for a discussion. That's up for individual organizations and hospitals to interpret, I suppose. But what we are finding is that most of the consultant midwives are in expert practice, and that means that they're leading on significant projects of change, and also work with women directly where there are extra additional care planning. So for example, women who may have complex care needs who are requesting a water birth or a home birth or a birth center birth, the consultant midwives use their expert clinical knowledge to kind of to navigate that system for the women and for other clinicians as well, and consultant obstetricians. So it is a real collaborative role that tries to bring everything together. So that's how most of the consultant midwives are executing. At least that was the one commonality that we found across all consultant midwife jobs.
Yeah, thank you, Caitlin. It was interesting, and it made me wonder, I should also do what I'm doing, and each one of us what is doing. Really introspect and see what were we in 2016 and 2018 and 2020. But thank you so much.
Thank you.
All right. So we move to the next speaker. Stephanie, is somebody here on Stephanie's behalf? I believe she was having problems because of the snow. Stephanie, are you here? Is there anybody here on Stephanie's behalf? Okay, we'll move to Claudia then. So Claudia Ravaldi, NLBC 205, is going to speak on how respectful was pregnant women's care during COVID-19 first wave in Italy.
Hello.
Hi, Claudia. Christine, would you like to ask the first question?
Thank you so much.
Christine, you need to unmute. Claudia, it was very interesting.
Carry on. Okay. Sorry. I had some difficulty with the mouse on my computer. Yes. Claudia, can you just tell us a little bit just about the context of the study? So in what ways did the maternity services change in Italy in response to the pandemic and the lockdown?
Yeah, we tried to assess this at the very beginning of pandemic because since the middle of February till the very first weeks of March, unfortunately, Italy was severely hit, and our maternity service had to reorganize very quickly. Especially in the northern of Italy, pandemic was really huge, and so a lot of hospitals need to reorganize. As a consequence, many appointments was cancelled, and many meetings with midwives were rescheduled. Especially in the northern part of our country, women and midwives suffer a lot in order to reorganize and do not let women alone. In this situation, the very difficult issue was that at a national level, we have no an immediate response about how to reorganize and how to let women at the center of the course. And so a lot of midwives try to reorganize themselves, for example, using technology, and in order to let the center open, not the hospitals remain open, but outpatient clinic, for example, were closed or were changed in their main field of service due to COVID pandemic. So in the very first month was very worrying, and a lot of women start to be very anxious in order to be able to recognize the place in which they can go to make the visits, the place in which they can go to have labor and childbirth also. And I mean, one of the huge problem that is still now present in our healthcare system is that, unfortunately, not all the hospitals were able to reorganize and to warrant that women and also partners of choice were allowed to come to the visit, to ultrasound appointments, and also to labor and childbirth. We have still a huge percent of women that are unaware of what will be happen in the future. I mean, in the next month, because they have to to make the childbirth, but they are not able to recognize who is going to program their childbirth with them, their plan, the childbirth plan, and also about who can be allowed to come in hospitals. We are not knowing, and we are at the 10th month of pandemic, so a lot of time, but still in Italy, despite the low level of COVID-19 positive women, because it is a very encouraging data, very low amount of pregnant women were attacked by COVID pandemic. But despite this encouraging data, we have no well-organized system. So many women are still worrying.
Claudia, it was very heartening to know the change and the rapid reorganization that occurred with you in Italy. We in India also had one of the worst lockdowns possible that we had, but we were not able to reorganize ourselves as well as you could, or maybe, you know, we were it very difficult. And I like the study for the hope that it gives, that it is possible to reorganize your system very fast, change the way in which we can do it, and then, you know, improve the way people feel or the women feel. And I love the graph of or the map of Italy where you know showed the colors, and I hope that one day it will come to white, all white. But really liked it, and I hope that we can do a similar analysis for ourselves, and then see 1 month later, you know, do it. So I loved your study, and it was very interesting and very nice of you to submit it to this conference. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you, Claudia.
Thank you.
And thank you very much, Christine and Nuzhat. And may I remind you both to please send in your scores as soon as possible. And all the authors, we will be having the announcement of prizes for both the posters and the orals at 8:10 in Hall A on the platform. So please do join us at 10 minutes past 8 to hear who has got the first 3 prizes for posters and first 3 prizes for oral. Thank you so much, Christine.
Do we know that we don't have Stephanie?
Yes, Stephanie had messaged on the group that she's having problems with her connectivity because there's a lot of snow there. And I had asked her to, you know, switch off her video and try on audio. I've sent an email also, but she's obviously unable to connect. I also said she could get the second author to connect, but they're obviously having internet issues.
Thanks.
So if you could just send the scores without the interactive.
Yeah, okay, we'll do that.
All right. Thank you so much. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
And goodbye from Hall B.
Thank you.